For many, the crimes of September 11, 2001 have been investigated and the case closed. The conclusion? 19 Arab hijackers led by Osama bin Laden successfully carried out the terrorist attacks by catching a trillion-dollar defense industry completely off guard. However, millions of people around the world say that there are many questions left unanswered about what really happened that day and why. Because most of the evidence has been destroyed, independent investigators have taken the initiative to piece together the facts themselves. One of them being Kevin Ryan. He's the co-editor of the Journal of 9/11 Studies and author of Another 19, a book examining 19 alternative suspects that he alleges has the real means, motive, and ability to pull off the 9/11 attacks. I spoke to him earlier and first asked him why he decided to write this book. Check it out.
Well, because 9/11 was the origin of the war on terror, which has caused such devastation around the world. And the official reports are known to be false. The 9/11 Commission report did not answer a majority of the questions that were posed to it. And the NIST World Trade Center report is unscientific and false. So we need to know what happened on 9/11, and we can't depend on the government to tell us.
Well, Kevin, the official narrative, of course, said to the American people about this tragedy is that 19 hijackers led from a man in a cave acted pretty much completely alone to attack the U.S. You allege that this is not the case, and in fact that there is an extraordinary amount of evidence that points to other players involved. Who are the other 19?
Well, these men were business leaders, military and intelligence leaders, government representatives in the United States. They're from the CIA, the FBI, the Secret Service, NORAD, and private companies like the Carlyle Group and SAIC. Some of them have a history of covert operative experience, and others appear to have worked for what seemed to be a private intelligence network. But basically, all of them are suspicious in that they were in perfect position to make 9/11 happen in just the way that it did.
Kevin, when people hear this kind of information, many times they'll ask, well, if members of the U.S. government or government insiders or business affiliates allowed or even worked to ensure that 9/11 did happen, why? What was to gain for these people from 9/11 taking place?
Well, there were many benefits. Obviously, the seizure of natural resources in countries like Iraq, which has the world's second largest reserves of oil, and Afghanistan, which has natural gas and other mineral resources. Really, the fact is that in our day and age, whoever controls Eurasia controls the world. So it does appear that the war on terror driven by 9/11 was motivated by seizure of the Eurasian resources, and that's what we've seen happen since then.
Well, we certainly have seen that happen, Kevin, and I think a lot of people know, of course, the household names Rumsfeld, Wolfowitz, Bush. Obviously, those are the names of the main neocon propagandists selling that premise of the whole agenda that's been put in place since 9/11. I wanted instead for you to focus on a couple lesser-known people, one of who you talk about in your book, Paul Bremer. Who is Paul Bremer, and how does he tie into what happened on 9/11?
Well, Bremer is most well known for having been the Iraq occupation governor after the U.S. invasion in 2003. He was selected for that job by Donald Rumsfeld, and he made a lot of very terrible decisions that would not make a lot of sense for someone who's trying to help the country. For example, disbanding the Iraqi army and so forth. But Bremer has many other very interesting features about his history. He was a longtime assistant to Henry Kissinger, who was selected by Bush to lead the 9/11 Commission originally. He was also a terror propagandist throughout the 1990s. He led a lot of commissions, U.S. commissions that worked to transfer of Soviet military or terrorist attacks into a threat of Islamic terrorism. Unfortunately, none of these commissions were able to report the incidents that had already been revealed that were known as Operation Gladio, Operation Northwoods, and the Gulf of Tonkin event, which were state-sponsored plans. So what's most important about Bremer is on 9/11, he just happened to be at the World Trade Center as an executive for a company called Marsh & McLennan, and that was just for a short period of time for him. he was there, but he was not killed. Instead, he spent the day on television telling us what happened and who we needed to attack because of it. One other thing I would say about Bremer is that he was a director for a company that had patented a thermite demolition device.
So on the morning of 9/11, instead of serving in the Marsh & McLennan, he's there kind of selling the bin Laden narrative before even the facts were really laid out, Kevin. It's pretty interesting. Kevin, what about Dwayne Andrews? Who's that?
Well, Dwayne Andrews was the longtime protege of Dick Cheney. Andrews said that Cheney was his lifelong hero. But what's interesting about Andrews is that he led a company called Science Applications International Corporation, or SAIC, for the 8 years before 9/11. And this company has so many important links to 9/11, it's really astounding. They created the national databases that identified and tracked alleged terrorists. They provided terrorism screening equipment to the airports in the United States. Andrews himself was a leading expert on the defense communication systems that failed on 9/11. And SAIC helped create the official account for what happened at the World Trade Center, both after 9/11 and after the 1993 bomb. And additionally, one of the SAIC managers actually managed the robots at Ground Zero, which had been used for elimination of unexploded ordnance in the past. So these things all give hints, and there are many more, that SAIC may have played a role in the attack.
Let's talk about Dick Cheney, the man behind the man, I guess you could say. Everyone knows him, but what dirt do you have on Cheney? What does the evidence point to his complicity in the event and subsequent cover-up?
Well, the one thing that most people have cited is the testimony of Secretary of Transportation Norman Mineta, which indicates that Dick Cheney, as vice president, was tracking one of the flights as it was approaching Washington. And that's surprising because the official report says there was no one who knew about Flight 77, which was the flight he was tracking. And he had issued orders about this flight some way. But also people should remember that Dick Cheney was the leading voice behind lies that have started several other wars, one of them being the Gulf War in 1990-91. He told several lies along with his partner, Dwayne Andrews. And then he was behind the lies that started the Iraq War, the weapons of mass destruction, the claims that Saddam was associated with 9/11. So in between these obvious deceptions to start war was 9/11, Dick Cheney being in charge at the White House, ultimately doing nothing to protect us. Cheney also worked to obstruct and delay the investigation into 9/11, actively worked to prevent an investigation into 9/11. There are other things, including the continuity of government program, which I go into my book, that I lead people, I think, to believe that Dick Cheney is a top suspect.
Well, I think, you know, when you're pointing out a lot of these players in your book, Kevin, a lot of them are members of the Project for a New American Century, that document that kind of says that this crew needed an event like a new Pearl Harbor in order to kind of enact that new hegemony around the world and that overtaking of Eurasia's resources and militarization. Kevin, what about people who say, you know, all of this is really fascinating, it's really interesting, all, however, circumstantial, coincidental, all can be chalked up to ineptitude by the Bush administration to kind of have this event happen? They never expected it. What's your response to that?
Well, there are a few things that are not just circumstantial, but you're right. The circumstantial evidence is overwhelming, I would say. But in some cases, some of these suspects can be brought up on charges. For example, some of them were among those people who were associated with 9/11 insider trading, like Fort Walker, who's one of the suspects. Others lied directly to Congress, including Ralph Eberhart, the commander of NORAD, and George Tenet, the director of the CIA. And that is, of course, against the law to lie to Congress. So there's circumstantial evidence, but there is more than that as well.
Right. And we have about a minute left, but I wanted you to touch upon the enterprise called the Bank of Credit and Commerce International. What is this, and why should we be concerned about it?
Well, BCCI was a known terrorism network that was shut down in the early 90s and then bought up by the United Arab Emirates. And people should know that Richard Clark, the leading counterterrorism expert in the United States, was basically a representative of the United Arab Emirates and had warned them on several occasions of CIA plans to stop al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden. So BCCI runs throughout the book as one of several themes. Paul Bremer, again, with Kissinger Associates, had meetings with BCCI and refused to release documents to the Senate investigation that covered that scandal.
Well, it's been called the world's sleaziest bank by Time magazine in the early 90s. Maybe we should be looking a lot more carefully at this entity. Kevin Ryan, amazing to have you on, co-editor of the Journal of 9/11 Studies.
Thank you.
Well, guys, that's it for tonight's show. See you back here to break the set again tomorrow.